Jesse Eisenberg, Academy Award nominated actor for playing Mark Zuckerberg in Aaron Sorkin's brilliant film, The Social Network. He's known for playing these brainy, troubled characters. Grew up in New Jersey. His mother was a performer and an artist. His father was a taxi driver. But his first love was writing. We're learning a lot about Jesse Eisenberg over the last couple of weeks because he's on his press junket for the movie and the Academy Awards. And he's so likable. He's on every show. I mean, you just turn on the TV or turn on your podcast and there he is. He first started writing short stories when he was a kid. I love that. I write short stories. And then he started writing screenplays as a teenager and he was taken very seriously. He had representation as a teenager. In fact, he wrote a play about Woody Allen that was, I guess, so disturbing that he received a cease and desist letter. And what makes it even funnier is that he went on later in life to be in 2 Woody Allen films. He wrote and directed his first feature in 2022. It's called When You Finish Saving the World. It's about a complex mother-son relationship. And this showed his talent for writing complex interpersonal relationships with emotional depth. An established actor, but he decided to stay behind the camera for his first feature film and focus on the directing. Coralie Fargeat, Academy Award nominee, director, and screenwriter now. She was born in Paris, studied at one of the most prestigious cinema schools in the world, La Famille. She lives in France primarily, but does come to the United States quite a bit, especially California, obviously. And she worked early on in television as a script supervisor and a first AD. She credits that experience to being able to be meticulous on set about her own movies. She has several early short films, and they have some of the same themes as this screenplay, with female empowerment, transformation, vengeance, identity. Her first feature film was in 2017. It's called Revenge, and it's about a woman's transformation after a brutal assault. And this launched her with a unique perspective and her very unique cinematic style. And this, her second film, The Substance, with 3 Academy Award nominations, is surely going to take her to the next level. She says she's highly influenced by the works of David Cronenberg. He's the guy that did The Fly. You can see some of that in the screenplay. And then also David Lynch with his ability to take something and shift it and make it seem dreamlike. And I imagine that that's what this film is like as well, because the screenplay is certainly that way. She pushes boundaries. She likes to make her readers and her viewers uncomfortable and question societal norms. And that's what this screenplay does. She does seem to be a force. And after this screenplay and this film, I'm sure she'll have many more opportunities. Waves by Trey Edward Shults. 36 years old, from Texas. He grew up about 100 miles from where I grew up, near the Houston area. He broke into the movie business as an intern for Terrence Malick, including when he was working on The Tree of Life, and you can see some of that influence in his films. Shults is vocal about his family's struggles, including his absent father and his father's addiction and domestic violence. Again, these are themes that often show up in his writing and his screenplays. In fact, his first major film, Krisha, is a story about a mother coping with the pain of 2 children dealing with addiction. The film was shot in his hometown of Montgomery, Texas, and actually stars his aunt, who plays herself, a fictionalized version of herself. That film came out in 2015. His second screenplay and film was It Comes at Night in 2017. This is a psychological thriller / horror post-apocalyptic story about paranoia, basically. And he says that he wrote this when he was dealing with complex emotions of his father dying. Then 2019 is our film today, our screenplay today, Waves. But he's just getting started. And in less than 2 months, May of 2025, his next film is coming out. It's called Hurry Up Tomorrow. It's a psychological music thriller starring The Weeknd and Jenna Ortega. The Weeknd plays a fictionalized version of himself, just like his aunt did in his first movie. So everyone's waiting for that, excited about it. And it's another reason to go back and look at Waves and see just how brilliant this story is. Shults has established himself as someone who uses contemporary songs to amplify the storytelling, sometimes creating scenes specifically to match the hook and the beat of the song. So let's talk about Jordan Peele. He's a modern-day icon in the horror and comedy communities. He's played a major role in revolutionizing the horror genre, opening the door for important horror movies with something to say, movies that challenge our thinking. He's 46, raised in New York, married with a child, and he attended Sarah Lawrence College in New York. That's also the same school that J.J. Abrams went to, but that was earlier. He studied puppetry before switching to comedy, and that led to an early 2000s stint in Amsterdam doing an improv show called Boom Chicago. It's a big deal. That's where he got his start, and it's also where Seth Meyers and Jason Sudeikis got their starts. This led to him working on Mad TV, where he formed a partnership with Keegan-Michael Key, and then in 2012, Key and Peele, that beautiful, beautiful sketch comedy show. He won a Peabody, he won an Emmy, and then he wrote the screenplay, Get Out, which became his directorial debut in 2017, and he won an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. At the same time, people who loved his comedy were surprised to see him do horror, but it is a very natural crossover and makes a lot of sense. In fact, Get Out was filmed right here where I'm sitting today, 4 miles from my house. I sure wish I had known that. I'd have been stalking over there to see what was going on. Us is his second film. Then he did Nope, which was in 2022. I love all 3 of his films, but settled on Us as our screenplay breakdown because of its velocity on the page and its traditional horror tropes that aren't done in a tired way. He also now has a very powerful production company called Monkey Paw Productions that's branching out beyond his projects. In fact, they produced the 2021 version of Candyman. They also produced the reboot of The Twilight Zone, although he did appear in that as the host of the show. He is a very busy man. The writers of this screenplay, there too, is Robert Eggers and his brother, Max. Let's start with Max. He's one of the 3 Eggers brothers. He's actually the twin to Sam, the other filmmaker, and Robert is their half-brother. His first foray into film was as a production assistant on his brother Robert's short film in 2008, A Telltale Heart. Then 10 years later, he co-wrote this screenplay with his brother Robert, and this was his first writing credit. Then in 2024, he co-wrote and co-directed a film called The Front Room with his other brother, Sam. It's a psychological thriller about a pregnant couple and a wicked stepmother. And rumors are that he might possibly be involved with one of Robert's next upcoming projects, but we don't know. They all grew up in New Hampshire. Their father was a Shakespearean professor, and their mother was an actor in a local theater and also ran a theater company. So they grew up among the arts, and look at them now, the 3 of them, making films. And Robert Eggers, also co-writing this screenplay and directing it, he's become a genre all by himself. I mean, he is an icon at this point. We learned a lot about him when we broke down Nosferatu. That's on a previous episode. You should check it out. And he was deep into the theater, given his mom. He went to college for theater design, and also costume design. And you could see that in all of his screenplays and all of his films. He worked in the New York theater scene. He did classical theater. He did the experimental theater. He did a lot of short films and sort of edged himself into the film world. And then 2015, The Witch, this low-budget horror, just crushed it at the box office. And then it was time for him to start making more movies. The Lighthouse, our screenplay today, is his second film in 2019, like we said. And then 3 years later, he co-wrote and directed The Northman. He did that with an Icelandic poet, co-wrote that one. And then on Christmas Day, 2024, Nosferatu came out. And now we know we're getting another Christmas present. But not this year, boys and girls. You'll have to wait. 2026, Christmas Day, Werewolf. What we know about it is that it's set in the 13th century, so 1200s, England, and it's being described as his darkest script yet. That's hard to believe. Also, he signed on to possibly remake Pan's Labyrinth, which people are really excited about. He's married to a psychologist, that probably helps, and he lives in Brooklyn, has a kid. So let's meet Ari Aster, 38 years old, screenwriter from New York City. Comes from a family of artists like so many of our screenwriters and directors do. His mother was a poet. His father was a musician. He spent quite a bit of his childhood in New Mexico and some of it in England. He went to college at College of Santa Fe in New Mexico. Then he went to grad school, film school at AFI, the American Film Institute. And while he was in film school and even after film school, he was making a lot of short films. He made at least 8 of these provocative short films that became his calling card all over town, including one in 2011 called The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. And this was a story about family dysfunction and abuse. And it got people thinking, well, I think this guy could handle a feature film. Also in 2011, he did the short film Beau, which was the prototype for his feature film Beau is Afraid with Joaquin Phoenix. That was his 3rd feature film, but it started out as a short, and we'll talk more about that later. But the most important thing to know about Ari Aster, if you only could know one thing, is that he is a writer and director who specializes in grief and trauma and guilt and death, family dysfunction, things that truly make us think about ourselves and our own lives. And he does this through the vehicle of horror, mostly occult. But he is a drama-first storyteller. And this is what I was talking about earlier, saying that he has pushed the horror genre in this direction. Now there are several horror filmmakers who are doing exactly what he's doing and having huge success with it. When he talks about his stories, he says the horror emerges organically from the emotional breakdown itself. His famous quote actually is, "I write drama that gets hijacked by horror." And you could feel that. You could see it on the page. You could see it on the screen. But he is never afraid to push the envelope, push the boundaries, put us in uncomfortable situations, not only visually, but also psychologically ourselves, thinking about things that you may not want to be thinking about. You have Jennifer Kent, you have Robert Eggers, you have Jordan Peele, and many others who are doing this, but using this horror vehicle to tell an emotionally philosophical, relevant story rather than just jump scares. It is what horror is today for most of us. So what about him? He is very private. We don't know much about him at all. Even when he is promoting a film, he doesn't really answer questions about himself. He pushes that away. He has said over time that he has experienced a lot of grief and pain and trauma from family trauma that's been passed down through his family. And you see that in all of his films. Also, he says he struggles with anxiety and OCD tendencies, which show up in a lot of his characters. So he is, as you could tell, one of my favorites. I respect him so much. And he's a very controversial screenwriter, filmmaker, because some people don't like his stuff at all. But that's why it's art. And we all can decide what it means to us and what we find out about it that is revealing something about ourselves. But for me and my family, he's the man. And he started with feature films in 2018, and Hereditary was his very first. That's the one we're going to be breaking down today. Then he followed that up in 2019 with Midsommar, starring Florence Pugh. This is my favorite of his collection. I call it the daylight horror because the whole thing is bright and beautiful. And of course, it's about this young woman, and she's coping with the loss of her sister and her parents as she attends a pagan festival. And then in 2023, he finally got to make Beau is Afraid, starring Joaquin Phoenix. And this is a surreal story about an anxious man who's on a journey to visit his mother. And then, why this is so relevant, in a couple of weeks here, July 18th of this year, Eddington will be hitting the theaters. And it is a COVID-19 Western horror. So maybe he just made up a whole other genre. No one's ever heard of that before. But it has an all-star cast, including Joaquin Phoenix, Pedro Pascal, Emma Stone, Austin Butler, Luke Grimes, and many more. It's going to be something to see. There's been a lot of mixed reviews about it for the people who got to see early screenings, but you can expect that with a film that's playing a political line here. We're already 50-50 split before you even have an opinion about the movie. His found footage horror movie Milk and Cereal has received critical acclaim. Variety magazine listed it as the eighth best horror movie of 2024. He and his creative partner, Cooper Tomlinson, have a sketch comedy channel across all the platforms. It's called That's a Bad Idea, and it has millions of followers and hundreds of millions of views. Bloody Disgusting has called him the next big thing in horror, and The Guardian says he's a filmmaker to contend with for years to come. But most of all, my son. Welcome, actor, comedian, director, Curry Barker.
Hello, hello.
I wanted to have you on this podcast because of how important Key and Peele was to our lives. You know, it has a lot of adult content, but I thought it was important, even as a young kid, to expose you to that type of comedy. What are your thoughts about that when you look back on that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I say this to everybody that because I get asked quite a bit nowadays, what were your comedic inspirations? And I always say Key and Peele because it almost, there was, I know there was a lot of sketch comedy shows that exist, but for me, it was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. And I was like, wait, you can do that? You can just like make these small little concepts that are funny and go to the next thing. And it kind of became my dream job to like, because I always wanted to be an actor, but imagine being an actor, but one day you go to work and you're a cop, the next day you go to work and all their sketches, they do these crazy different roles every single time. That's like, what more can an actor ask for than a job like that? So, yeah, I mean, we used to watch Key and Peele at the house all the time. And I actually got a chance to meet Keegan Michael Key and at a screening one time, and I was scared, but I went up to him and I was like, "Hey, just so you know, you're the reason I'm funny." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, you're a huge inspiration of mine." And he was like, "Oh, thanks, man." He was super nice, but you could tell he was like, "Get away from me," you know. But he was super
That's
nice.
that's hilarious. Also,
Yeah.
too, you know, with their sketches, it's the story. Like it's not just being funny, being silly. Like there's always a beginning, a middle, and end. There's a twist and the
Yeah.
production value.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what I think maybe separates me and Cooper from other creators possibly on, TikTok and Instagram is that we took inspiration from that. We took inspiration from that. We didn't want to just shoot it on our phones like a lot of people do. We wanted to like make it look like a Key and Peele sketch, make it look like, a higher quality, maybe short film that's just like 1 minute long. And we
Mhm.
always try to incorporate some sort of twist. I mean, we're posting twice a week, so it's hard to like always have the greatest twist ever. But like, it'd be nice to maybe only post once a month where we could really make each skit just the absolute best. But
Right. And now you guys are killing it with the sponsored content, which some people they don't like that so much, but it's you got to pay the bills, and you guys are putting out commercials that don't seem like commercials.
yeah, like people that complain about it, I'm like, dude, like how do you expect us to keep making this stuff content for you each week, if you're not gonna let us get our bread from it,
Yeah,
It's like, come
right.
on, dude.
Well, today I'm covering Us, and I know that's a film that you've seen several times, and I asked you to watch it again just so it'd be fresh in your mind. So when you watched it again, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it it's really interesting. Jordan Peele is such a like has such an interesting. I think he was one of the first people to really start to like him, along with Ari Aster and a couple other filmmakers I really look up to, were like the first people to really start to like change the boundaries of what a horror movie could be.
Mm.
In the early 2000s, a horror movie was like just a lot of sexual stuff and like it was just, a popcorn movie that you could watch with your friends. It doesn't really have like a good story or anything. And then people like artists like Jordan Peele and Ari Aster started to like emerge from the grass, and like we started getting horror films that felt like more art and had a bigger like message behind it.
So what stood out watching it this time is maybe something you forgot before.
I did forget, which so I guess that's how long it's been since I've seen it. But it's that is a crazy twist, and it all makes sense the way she was acting when she was a little daughter, how she wouldn't talk to her parents, all that stuff. It's
Right.
like it all makes sense, but it's such a good twist is a twist that um it doesn't feel like a cheap cop out by the end. It actually feels like it completely makes sense. You know, of course, if you were to replace your daughter with a tethered daughter, she's not going to talk. You can talk to therapists, you can try and figure out what's wrong with her, but she's from this like underground world. Eventually, she'll come out of her shell and become the woman that she ended up becoming. But like, yeah, it was really cool.
Back to Jordan Peele, now not as a comedian so much, but as a filmmaker, what sort of influence do you think he's had on you as a young filmmaker?
Definitely, as a screenwriter, I think he has had a lot of influence. My manager is always trying to tell me to simplify action lines and stuff like that. And Get Out is one of the screenplays I read to kind of look at like, well, how does Jordan Peele write his action lines, you know? And I'm curious to hear what you kind of discovered with us. But from what I saw with Get Out, he is the most simplistic. Like he's kind of like what you were saying about Jesse Eisenberg, just so like simple, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you say you're interested to see how us is because it's a little different. He has some like really thick action lines in there. In fact, there's one that is 8 lines long and it's really 7 beats. So if he want, he could have broken that out into 7 different paragraphs, but he keeps it in one paragraph. But he also can easily turn it up, so when the action heats up is when it gets quicker.
How to use action and pacing to change the way I'm writing my action lines. I've always thought that's really cool and something that I've kind of discovered just through your videos and through like watching you like talk about what this person does and what that person does and seeing that there really isn't a right answer to how to write a script.
Right.
And I love it's so cool that writers use uh, their action lines to kind of show pacing for how the scene goes in their head, and I think it's something that I could get a lot better at. And me and Cooper are obviously writing a script right now together, and it's just something to think about.
From a cinematic standpoint, any scenes there that really stood out to you watching this last night?
Yeah, my favorite scene for me was the scene where the what do they call it? The tethered go to Elizabeth Moss character's family's house, and they're just having a great time on vacation, and then they all die in crazy ways, and that was kind of when I was like, oh crap, there's like. It was when he introduces like a big level of danger in the movie because you're actually seeing examples of like people being hurt by these
Mm-hmm.
things, you know.
Yeah, that it doesn't just apply to the Wilsons. Like, oh, this is a bigger thing that's going on.
Yeah,
Right.
it almost feels like if a zombie apocalypse movie had more of like a horror psychological twist to it.
Yeah. Makes me wonder what his next film's going to be. Another thing about that scene is in the screenplay, the house, the setting is described exactly like it is in the film, with the mezzanine going around the top and the lighting and the furniture. And so it makes me wonder, did did he write that and then they went out and scouted and found the exact place that looked like what he wrote, or did he rewrite it once they found the place that they actually liked? What do you think's most likely as a
He
filmmaker?
could have built this. He could have built it from
Yeah.
the ground up.
For $20 million, they may have just built the house. You're right.
Well, I mean, like in Hereditary, like that movie was like 15 or 10 million if I'm not mistaken, and that whole house is a soundstage. So that it's not out of the question at all that he could have completely. I used to work on This Is Us, and as you know, and I would just watch them. I would go to work and I would be like, this house wasn't there yesterday. What the heck? Like they just build stuff. It's crazy. But at the
Right.
same time, I could totally see a situation where he found the perfect house and was like, okay, now I got to kind of like make it fit, you know?
Right. That makes a lot of
So,
sense. I didn't even think of that. I mean, that is the most likely
yeah,
scenario.
yeah.
I was just thinking about my most recent experience with you going around and scouting and seeing the different locations.
100%. Well,
But
that was for
our
no
budget wasn't
money.
quite 20 million, not
Yeah,
yet.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it was a thrill of a lifetime to be on set for your most recent movie, which is now in post production. I know you can't tell us much about it, but what can you say?
Yeah, we haven't announced it yet, so it's not on IMDb. It's not really, there's you've read the script, you know everything about it. But it's in post production right now. It's we I've already handed off a complete cut to our financiers. The movie's called Obsession. It's I'm very very excited about it. I haven't even released a log line to anybody,
Yeah.
so nobody even knows. But I'm always just I always just want to beat myself. If it's better than Milk and Cereal, if it's better than my last project, then I'll be happy with that.
All right, Curry. Well, thanks for coming on with me. I thought this would be a great one since how important Jordan Peele has been in our lives. And I'm so proud of you and I love you. And we got to do it again.
Yeah, 100%. Let's do it again.
All right. Talk to you soon.
All right, love you too, Dad.
Let's meet our writer, Drew Hancock. He's a genre fluid writer and filmmaker in both TV and film, 46 years old, from Omaha, Nebraska. He's married to a social worker. That probably helps. Moved to Los Angeles after high school, had that A dream, and he stuck to it. He was a writer on many television shows, including Suburgatory, Blue Mountain State, that's probably the biggest, Mr. Pickles, My Dead Ex. So during the pandemic, he decided he wanted to write a feature script, and he went to work on Companion, and he wrote it in 2 weeks with a fully formed idea, which is totally unusual for any of us. But then he did what we all do, spent about a year working on it, refining it, getting the tone and the theme right, getting the story arcs correct. At the time, he shared a manager with Zach Cregger. Zach Cregger, the filmmaker who made Barbarians, which was a huge success. It hadn't come out yet, but it was already had a lot of buzz, was going to be a big movie. And Zach Cregger read the screenplay and loved it, thought it was outstanding. Once he got behind it, it was easy to start attaching producers to it. And the original thought was that Cregger was going to direct, but along the way, working with Hancock, he saw Hancock's passion, and he pitched the idea to him saying, why don't you direct it? And this film already had so much momentum, it was actually a possibility that he could do this. And when Hancock was asked to direct, he says he was shocked. He was also a little insecure. He had directed a couple of TV episodes, but nothing like this. And he cared about the screenplay so much. He wanted it to be a great film. But after 3 days, he realized that this was an opportunity that he just could not pass up. So he called them and he said, yes, thank you. Let's meet the writer, and that is Justin Kuritzkes. He turned 35 just this last week, recording this in May of 2025. And he grew up in Los Angeles. His father was a physician, his mother an estate attorney, studied philosophy and literature at Brown University. His first love was writing plays. He even wrote his first play at age 15, which from what I read is actually pretty good. His senior thesis in college was the play that he wrote, The Sensuality Party, which was actually performed off-Broadway in 2016. And at the same time, he was early to the party for the virtual internet boom. He made comedic videos on YouTube early in the day and had millions of viewers, hundreds of millions of views. So he created for himself a platform, and he used it to promote his first novel, a 2019 release called Famous People. It's about a 22-year-old pop star discovered through viral videos, and it was well received. And Challengers was his first screenplay. It gained traction in 2021 when it landed on the Blacklist. For those of you who don't know, that's a list every year that accumulates the best unproduced screenplays. It's a big deal to get on it. And it helped launch his career. So Challengers gets picked up, and it gets produced, and he gets hooked up with big-time director Luca Guadagnino, and it's a hit. And that leads immediately, right off the jump, he goes straight into Guadagnino's next film, which is Queer, starring Daniel Craig. And now he is a busy man. He is working to adapt Don Winslow's novel, City on Fire. It will star Austin Butler. Also doing a project with Jude Law. Also on top of that, working with DC to do a DC comic book movie featuring Sergeant Rock. So, very, very busy. But what might be the most interesting thing about him personally is that he's married to Selena Song. Okay, so if you're into screenwriting or movies, you know that name. She is the screenwriter and director for the movie Past Lives, which was a huge hit. And if I say that, some bells should go off. Wait a second, I know that story. So remember, in the screenplay, based on her real life, is her trying to deal with this conflict of loving her current husband so much in her life in New York, but also wondering what if and questions about being true to her culture and her old boyfriend from when she was a kid. He comes to visit in New York, and she's torn between her husband and her old life, and she's the translator between the two. It's much more complex and deep than how I just explained it. But yes, this is Justin, the real life Justin. That makes him like 10 times more interesting already. But obviously he's got a lot going for him, very talented, and much more than just being the husband to Selena Song, although that's pretty cool. Let's talk about the writer of this meta story, Damien Chazelle. He's an ambitious, visionary filmmaker, one of my favorites. He wrote, in fact, one of my very favorite films of all time, Whiplash, which I know I'm not in any danger of being unique with that being one of my favorite films. It is so good, and it gives you an idea of the type of stories that he can tell. And we have lots of years of getting films from Chazelle. He just turned 40. And think about it, when this film came out, La La Land, he was only 31. He was the youngest director to ever win Best Director. He grew up in New Jersey, as so many of our great filmmakers have. His mother is a medieval historian. His father, a computer science professor at Princeton. He went on to Harvard. He did go to Princeton Prep or high school. I'm not sure how that works, but he went to Harvard College, so highly educated. And the story begins there because that's where he met Justin Hurwitz, who's his friend, his collaborator. He's a musician. He has composed music for all of his major films. And together they have become quite the team. Originally, he aspired to be a jazz drummer. Okay, there's where Whiplash comes from. And that's where the filmography begins, Whiplash, 2014. Originally, it was a short film. It did very well, so he expanded it to a feature. It got made. It won 3 Oscars. Imagine your very first film winning 3 Oscars. One of them, of course, to the amazing performance by J.K. Simmons. It's about obsession and perfectionism and abuse. And then La La Land, 2016, 2 years later, that's where he won his Oscar for Best Director. 2 years after that, he followed up with First Man. He did not write that film, but he did direct it. That one also stars Ryan Gosling. And then Babylon came out in 2022, and that one's about 1920s Hollywood transitioning from the silent film era. It had some mega stars in it, and it didn't do as well at the box office or with critics or with streaming. And currently he is working on a secret project. All we know is that it may or may not be taking place in Paris, and his good friend Justin Hurwitz may or may not be involved. So really we don't know anything, but he is working on something. And he's married to Olivia Hamilton, who is an actor and a producer, and he has a child. But first, let's talk about the author, the screenwriter of this script, and that is Peter Straughan. He is a 56-year-old British screenwriter and playwright. Earlier in his adult life, he was a touring musician. He played the bass guitar and did that professionally. And then he decided to become a writer. So he went to school. He went to Newcastle University. He is known as one of the people in the industry that you go to if you're trying to adapt a historical fiction novel. Most notably for Tinker Tailor's Soldier Spy in 2011, he co-wrote that screenplay with his late wife, Bridget O'Connor, who died of breast cancer in 2010. He also adapted Donna Tartt's novel, The Goldfinch, in 2019, which is one of my favorite novels. So how was this screenplay developed? It was based on Robert Harris's novel Conclave. Harris is a best-selling novelist known for writing historical fiction that leans way more to the fiction side. He basically takes a real world idea and makes up a whole other story. The Conclave novel was very loosely, based on the 2012 papal election. A friend got Straughan connected with Harris, and he got to read the first 3 chapters of the manuscript while Harris was still writing the novel. He liked it a lot, said, please let me read the rest when you finish it. So after he completed the manuscript, he sent it over, and Straughan really liked it. But mostly he says he was impressed with the manuscript because he was not able to figure out what was going to happen and how it was going to end along the way, which he usually does when he reads a novel. So he signed on to do the adaptation and went to work. He went to the Vatican. He met with the cardinal. He toured. He got the vibe, the tone of what it's really like there. He says a lot of that shows up in the screenplay. And let's talk about the writer, Halina Reijn. In this case, she's also the director of this film. 49 years old, from Amsterdam. She started her career as an actress, first on the stage, then in many films. She comes from a very artistic family. Her father has a career in theater. She had a distinguished career at the Amsterdam Theater, which is sort of like Broadway over there. Was featured in many theatrical productions, won many awards. She was also in Valkyrie with Tom Cruise in 2008. And she started a very successful writing career in the late 2010s. She co-wrote Instinct in 2019, also directed that film, and was nominated for an Oscar for Best International Film. She also directed the 2022 horror slasher Bodies, 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 which has some success. She didn't write that one. And she co-created the television series Red Light. She's currently in development with A24 for her next project, and it's also about female perspective in an environment and situation that you might not expect. And that is what we're dealing with today with Baby Girl. All right, let's talk about those writers. Corbet and Fastvold, they met in 2012. They are partners both professionally and personally. They've been together in a relationship for a long time now. They have a child. Professionally, they've worked on many projects, including The Sleepwalker in 2014. They co-wrote that, and Fastvold was the director for that project. That's a psychological thriller about an unexpected guest. Then their next film was The Childhood of a Leader in 2015. They co-wrote that one together, and Corbet directed it. It's about the childhood of a future fascist dictator. Then in 2018, they wrote Vox Lux together, and Corbet directed that. It's about a pop star's rise to fame after a tragedy. And now The Brutalist, which is the crown jewel of this collection. Brady Corbet is a 36-year-old from Arizona. He's been in the entertainment business his whole life practically. He was a child actor. Many movies and TV shows, including King of Queens. Mona Fastvold is 38 from Norway. She also was an actor. She was in The Other Women. And she directed a film independently of her partner Corbet in 2020, The World to Come. That was about wives of 2 19th century farmers. So you can see where all of their stories involve history, societal impact, psychology. That is Sean Baker. He is from New Jersey, just like Jesse Eisenberg, who he featured on another episode. And he went to film school at NYU, so off to a good start. Also married to Samantha Kwan, who's an actor and a producer. She does a lot of production for his films, but she also does her own thing, has an outstanding reputation in Hollywood. He started in television. He was a co-creator for a sitcom that ended up on Fox, Greg the Bunny. You probably remember that. So he has quite the sense of humor, and that definitely shows up in this screenplay. And as a screenwriter and a filmmaker, he has specialized in writing character-driven stories about marginalized communities living out of sight on the fringes of society. He is really good at this, and especially interested in sex work. Sex work shows up in his last 4 films, his 4 major movies, and he always portrays it with dignity and respect and understands what's going on in the sex trade. And he is an advocate for decriminalizing sex work. His breakthrough film was Tangerine in 2015, and it was co-written with Chris Burgos and and it was shot entirely on an iPhone 5S, which is pretty cool. It was about transgendered sex workers in Los Angeles. So there we go. And in 2017, he and Brioche wrote The Florida Project, which I know that you'll remember. It's about a desperate young mother living in a motel next to Disney World, and she turns to sex work to provide for her child. Red Rocket in 2021 is about a former adult film star who returns back to their hometown in Texas, and nobody wants him. And then, of course, Honora is about a sex worker in New York, and this is so far his crown jewel.